Oh, Anne. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Anne and Emily. Anne of Green Gables, Emily of New Moon. And these two books are by the same author, L.M. Montgomery. So these books are very similar, but where they're different, they're very different. They're both following an orphan who is young, around 12, 13, and the trials and tribulations that this little girl faces. So in the case of Anne, Anne is mistakenly adopted by Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert. They believe they're getting a boy, and when she arrives, of course, she's not a boy. And she is a very dramatic little soul. She feels things very deeply. She has a very strong imagination, and they're very practical country folk. Not in a bad way. They love her. And I will say even Marilla's character, who's very stern and tries to take a very hard line with Anne in certain ways, she really loves her. So that's her story. She grows up, and there's different things that happen. We'll be talking a lot of spoilers. If you haven't read these books, I recommend both. They're both really good. The Anne series is 8 books. The Emily of New Moon series is 3 books. So this was written first, this was written second. And I think the author kind of started feeling like Anne wasn't a very realistic depiction of a little girl who's gone through a lot of trauma. So I'm not sure if that's what she was trying to fix with Emily of New Moon, but Emily is different. Her life is different. Anne is almost, there's things that are alluded to in Anne that are very difficult. She says things like, I had a window friend, she means her reflection, and I would look at her in this cupboard that was the only cupboard that wasn't smashed by her foster parents' intoxicated husband. Things like that, where you see a little bit of the horror she must have endured, but it's dealt with very, like, you're only seeing it through the eyes of this 13-year-old girl who has a very warm, tender heart. She's not in any way bitter. She's a very sweet, loving person. She wants to share her imagination and her ideals with the world. And she has a best friend, Diana Barry, who's her bosom friend. That's a thing from Anne. And Diana is also a very sweet, loving, kind child, and they have this really sweet friendship. And then there's her rival at the beginning, and then later a love interest, Gilbert Blythe, who is, wonderful. I love Gilbert. But he's set up very early on to be her rival. He calls her carrots. She has red hair. He's, they're at odds with each other. And he wants to make up several times in the book, and she's not having it because she feels that she needs this rivalry to, kind of keep her going at times. Oh, Anne. So that's the setup for Anne of Green Gables. And I will say this book is sweeter and more lighthearted. This one does end on kind of a sad note. There's a death, but it's dealt with very differently. And I will say that this book is not in any way, to my way of thinking, like Anne has an imagination, but it's her imagination throughout the whole. Like she passes out in the woods and she thinks she's seen things, but you're led to believe in the very practical side of things. And then Anne's world is the very imaginative, unpractical side. And those two things don't join. And that's different from Emily of New Moon, which I'll get into. So I love this book. I have read the whole series. I highly recommend it. And I think it's just a great book, if somewhat idealized. And then there's Emily. So Emily is raised by her father. Her mother dies when she's very young. And then, of course, because this is going to be a story about an orphan, her dad dies as well. And she is going to be placed with family. And everyone is very reluctant to take her because her dad, her mom ran away with the dad, and her mom's family all abandoned her. And so they are proud people. They are not going to let her be an orphan because that would reflect poorly on them, but nobody really wants her. So they draw straws, and she ends up going with her Aunt Elizabeth, Aunt Laura, and Uncle Jimmy. They all run this farm, New Moon, and they're all the unmarried aunts and uncles. Aunts and an uncle. But Jimmy is called Cousin Jimmy for reasons, and the other ones are Aunt Elizabeth and Aunt Laura. And Aunt Elizabeth is kind of the Marilla figure in that she is very stern. She's very difficult to love. She's tough on Emily throughout the whole book. And Laura is the loving, kind, giving kind of Matthew character, contrasting very sharply with Aunt Elizabeth. But here's the thing. Aunt Elizabeth ain't no Marilla. I'm just going to put it out there. She's not. She's not as kind. She's not as gracious. She doesn't have the sense of humor. She's a much harsher character than Marilla. And although Marilla does things that obviously can hurt Anne, like she doesn't mean to, Aunt Elizabeth doesn't seem to really care. And she doesn't seem to acknowledge in any way, even in her inner dialogue, that she does not know how to raise a kid. Marilla seems to kind of have this fumbling way about her where she knows, like, I'm an old woman. I'm a single old woman who is now a mother and doesn't know how to be one. So it's actually somewhat worse that these people are related to Emily and she doesn't seem to have any feeling for her. This is her sister's daughter. And she doesn't seem to be able to pull out any kind of real love and compassion for her. And that's sad. Marilla and Matthew are not related to Anne in any way, and they still love her. So Emily's, Diana Barry is Ilse. I hope that's how you say that name. And she is a wild, crazy girl. She's got a temper. They fight all the time because she just has to let her temper out. She's not the sweet, prim Diana Barry. And I don't know if this was like this Ellen Montgomery's attempt at realism, but yeah. The love interests are Perry and Teddy, who are Emily's friends. And Perry is real hot-headed, and then Teddy is the more sensitive artist. So I will say this book is going to go into harsher themes, like Teddy's mother. She is obviously mentally deranged. She kills his pets so that he won't love them more than he loves her. She's insane, and this is kind of glossed over in a way of she's, so it's sad that she loves him that way and that she's a freaking loon. Stuff like that is just very much like, oh, and of course, Ilse's big conflict is that her dad is an atheist, and that's a really big deal in that time, because it was different. So it's just a very different book. It's a lot of things that are a lot harsher. Emily gets tormented at school. It's not one guy calling her carrot. It's like all the girls gang up on her. And I will say Emily versus Anne. Anne has a very sharp, quick temper, but it's, over and done. Like, Emily does not take anything from anybody. She doesn't take it from the adults. She doesn't take it from the kids. She fights back. One thing I really liked about her is that she wants to be a writer. She writes poetry and wants to write novels. And I think that's really cool because that's what I love to do. So yeah, this book though, at the end, so like Emily has a really, strong imagination, and Ilse's mother supposedly ran away, and that's why the dad became an atheist, because his wife left him for another person, then she died on a ship when she tried to leave with her lover. So Emily hears this, finds out about it, and is so devastated. She believes so strongly that that couldn't be the case. Those are major spoilers for the book. She actually gets sick at one point, and in the throes of a fevered passion says, no, she couldn't have done it. She fell in the well. She fell in the well. She's in the well. I know. And so there's this well that would have been in the path of where this Elsie's mom would have gone if she would have left her home on the night in question. All these things. But they do end up finding Elsie's mother's body in this well. So this book is really blending the kind of fantasy, like the imagination versus these like spiritual, weird, like how did she know? She had this foresight. She knew all along that Elsie's mother couldn't have done this, couldn't have left her baby. And then they find her body, and like, this is not an Anne of Green Gables story. This is a totally different thing. I was kind of horrified by that. Like, I don't know. It was just weird. And of course, it all wraps up at the end with, Elsie's dad loving her again and, turning his life around and all that. But yeah, this is a very different book. I will just say I liked it. I think it's fun. I think there's a lot of things very similar in the writing and the imagination of Emily versus Anne. I will say I much prefer Anne. It's not realistic, I don't think, but I just like the sweetness that's there. I like that there's some hard things that happen, but it's a very sweet story. I plan on continuing reading all this, but those are my thoughts on Emily and Anne, my favorite. And it's just, I don't know, I just like the dead mom in the well, like, I just couldn't. I'm sorry. I felt like I was reading, like a gothic novel. I'm like, oh, whoa, she never really ran away with her lover. She's in the well. Okay. So, but no, I'm not taking anything away from this. This is a good book. There's a lot of good characters. I like Cousin Jimmy. I will say one more thing, that she has a friendship with a older, I believe it's a cousin. And I don't know, that one was weird. If you know what I'm talking about, I'll find out his name. Okay, so Dean Priest, who is, I believe, her cousin, Dean. I'm not sure if he's going to be in this story later, but he seems to almost be implying that he's waiting for her to grow up so he can marry her. Like, he's not saying this to her. This is an audience kind of being in on, and I get like cousins marrying cousins and, him kind of just, like, that happened. But it's just weird because he sees, like, this artistic soul in her, and he says things about, when you're older and, stuff like that. And it's weird. I mean, as a modern reader, it's very weird. But yeah, I mean, I still think the writing's good. I still think it's a fun book. I still like Emily. Like, she's a very likable character. It's easy to root for her. So I recommend. But those are my thoughts on Emily versus Anne. And I will definitely be curious to see who you loved, if you loved Anne or Emily. And also, I think whichever one you read first, you probably liked more. I read Anne a long time ago and just recently read Emily. So tell me your thoughts. Definitely let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Talk to you later. Bye.